you say is the biggest ethical challenge that us coming right out of school and into the workforce? What is the biggest ethical challenge that we face in the PR world today?
I think young people face a very big situation with ethics because, let's face it, you've worked very hard to accomplish your educational goals. You're very excited about entering the field. You're very concentrated on being a professional and succeeding. And sometimes you get the priorities maybe a little turned around. And ethics can get sort of pushed to the back. And you don't ever want ethics as a non-priority or as a low priority. It has to be a top priority, whether it's your first week in the field or whether you've been in the field for 30, 40 years. It's got to be a top priority.
Yeah, so you kind of mentioned it because we are new in industries and we're new to jobs. So say we come across an ethical thing, but we just started here, maybe don't want to rock the boat, we just got to land a job we really like. How can we approach the issue of ethics when we are asked to do something by an employer that we maybe doesn't sit right with us?
First of all, you must address it. It will be uncomfortable. You may question, number one, if you should address it, and number two, how aggressive you should be in addressing it. Most important thing is it must be addressed. Regardless of how you decide to approach it, it has to be addressed. I think the most important way for you to address it is to take a long-term view. A short-term view, yes, would very much dwell on how you're going to handle this particular situation at this particular time. But the long-term view is if you begin to compromise or slide past questions of ethics, there's a very, very slippery slope ahead of you. Hopefully, you're in the field for the long run. It's your profession. You intend to not only be part of the profession, but indeed to develop within the profession and to contribute to the profession. I think that one of the most important ways to think about how you're going to handle it is whether you're contributing to the field or perhaps raising some questions in the field. Mm-hmm. I think the first thing you have to do is come to a very firm conclusion of how you feel personally about ethics. Secondly, take into consideration your relationship with your immediate supervisor or boss, and then handle it. It's not going to be easy. It's probably not going to be comfortable, but it's the right thing to do. And that's always what you consider. Is it the right thing to do? And it is.
Mm-hmm. So how would you define ethics in that setting?
That's a good question. How do you define ethics? One of the ways, of course, is what I just said. It's the right thing to do. I think the other thing, perhaps that would be useful for you, go back and take a look at the PRSSA Code of Ethics. It's never, ever too late or not having enough time to go back and review those ethics. In fact, as you begin your career, I would recommend you have a copy of them in your desk, in your planner, or whatever. And anytime there's a question like this, review those ethics, that code of ethics. Another thing certainly you could do is if you're fortunate enough to have a mentor or at least someone in the profession that you feel comfortable to confide in, you can certainly talk it over with someone who's been in the field a little longer than you. Oftentimes articulating your concerns, how you feel personally, and whatever is very, very helpful in a difficult situation like that.
Okay, awesome. And you having worked in healthcare for many, many years,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you faced a lot of maybe crisis communication, a lot of on-the-fly PR.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever faced an ethical dilemma where you had to make a hard choice how to present information, whether to present information, and how did you approach that?
I was very fortunate, particularly when you consider how long I worked in the field, because I worked in the field in the media for a number of years before I moved over into an advertising PR agency and then ultimately into healthcare communications. I was very fortunate in that I never had a very stark black and white kind of situation. I had some delicate situations where you knew what you had to do, but it was not going to be a comfortable thing to do, where you had to make a recommendation to usually the C-suite, the CEO or the COO or CFO. I was fortunate in most cases to have a good enough relationship that they listened to me, and we ultimately reached a mutual decision, a decision that we both felt was the right thing to do. When I was in the agency, several times we made presentations to clients, potential clients, and when we left the presentation, my partner and I looked at each other and said, I'm not sure this is right for us. I'm not sure this client is perhaps on the same page with us or whatever. And what happens, I think, when you've been in the business for a while, you begin to come up with good decisions based on past experience. I know when I was in the agency, my partner and I, almost 100% of the time, had the same reaction and came to a mutual decision where we just walked away from a client initially that we felt posed potential problems.
Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome. So that kind of answers the next question is when you have a client that is maybe a potential client and you feel they have ethical differences with you and you might run into an issue, the answer is just, I think maybe you should work with somebody else, pretty like black and white response.
I think so. Now, different people would have a different answer to that. Many people would weigh that decision in terms of what the return would be to the agency. Perhaps this is a big client. Perhaps it could be a very lucrative client that would mean a lot to the development of the agency. And basically, you have to weigh all of the considerations as to whether you want to go forward. You might want to discuss it further and try to get a really clear distinction from the client. But my recommendation would be if you're getting, call it vibes or whatever you want to call it, if you're not feeling comfortable initially, if at all possible, walk away. It has been my experience in the couple of times that we went ahead with a client we weren't sure about, it never worked out. Because when you differ on issues as fundamental as ethics, then you're going to differ on a lot of issues. It's never going to be a comfortable, mutually beneficial relationship.
Okay, thanks. And lastly, is there any other piece of advice you would give to us, or just anything you'd like to say about ethics in general as we move on to the next chapter, graduating?
Graduating in the exciting time. I think I would reiterate what I said to you earlier. Print out that code of ethics. Keep it close to you. Don't ever forget it. It's the absolute foundation of what you are and what you're all about. Your professional life and the foundation you're laying right now for your professional life in our business is so closely related to your personal life. And this is the same situation that some other professions find themselves in, where occasionally they are confronted with ethical questions. And I think the most important thing is to keep that that PRSA Code of Ethics with you. If you're having questions, again, review them. If you have a mentor or someone you trust, discuss it. But get that question or that concept straight in your mind of how you want to handle it right from the beginning. I've always felt very strongly about ethics, and occasionally you have a situation that drives it home. A couple of years ago, there was a graduate student in a class of mine, and he was new to the communications field. And I mentioned public relations in some context to him. And he said, "Oh, I would never work in that. I would never lie for a living." And while that took my breath away, I think it also stands to be a message for all of us that not all people understand public relations and perhaps have very varied and, if you will, strange views about public relations. And that's always a milepost for us. That was a milepost for me because ethics always been a very crucial part of public relations as far as I was concerned. But to have someone who's not familiar with public relations to say that to me reminded me again of how important ethics are.